The notice taped to my garage door was bright pink and impossible to miss, demanding I remove my pallet jack from my driveway within 48 hours or face daily fines of $50. I stood there with my morning coffee, staring at the ridiculous piece of paper while my blood pressure climbed higher than it had in months. My name is Richard Brennan, and I had lived in the Meadowbrook Heights subdivision in Gilbert, Arizona, for 3 years without major incident. Sure, the HOA was a bit uptight about lawn height and mailbox colors, but this was different. This was my pallet jack, the one I used every single Tuesday and Thursday morning to load and deliver food to the Sunrise Senior Center downtown. The thing was parked neatly against my garage wall, barely visible from the street, and suddenly it was a crisis that demanded immediate action. I ripped the notice off my door and marched back inside, my wife Sarah already at the kitchen table with her laptop open for her remote workday. She looked up at me with concern written across her face. "What's wrong?" she asked, closing her computer slightly. I slapped the pink paper down on the table. "The HOA, they want me to get rid of the pallet jack." She picked up the notice and read it, her eyebrows rising with each line. "This is ridiculous. You use that for the senior center deliveries. Don't they know that?" Apparently not, and apparently they don't care. I pulled out my phone and found the number for the HOA management office. It was only 7:30 in the morning, but the notice said their office opened at 8. I had exactly 30 minutes to cool down before I could call and get this sorted out. Those 30 minutes felt like 3 hours. I paced around the kitchen, rehearsing what I would say, trying to keep my tone civil and reasonable. Sarah watched me with sympathy, occasionally reminding me to breathe and stay calm. By the time 8 o'clock rolled around, I had my speech prepared and my phone already dialing. "Meadowbrook Heights HOA, this is Brenda speaking." The voice was cheerful and oblivious to my frustration. "Hi, Brenda. This is Richard Brennan from 4782 Sycamore Drive. I received a notice this morning about my pallet jack, and I need to speak with someone about getting this resolved." "Oh yes, let me see." I heard clicking on a keyboard. "Yes, I see the violation notice here. You'll need to speak with our board president, Patricia Henderson. She handles all violation disputes. Can I transfer you, please?" I waded through tinny hold music that sounded like it was recorded in 1987. "This is Patricia." The voice that came on the line was sharp and clipped, the kind of voice that probably asked to speak to managers on a regular basis. "Miss Henderson, this is Richard Brennan. I got a notice about my pallet jack, but there seems to be a misunderstanding. I use that equipment for volunteer work delivering food to seniors. It's not junk or abandoned property. Mr. Brennan, the rules are quite clear. Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the HOA covenant states that commercial equipment may not be stored in plain view of the street or neighboring properties. Your pallet jack qualifies as commercial equipment." I felt my jaw tighten. "It's barely visible from the street, and like I said, I use it for volunteer work. I load food donations twice a week and transport them to the Sunrise Senior Center. Without it, I can't do those deliveries efficiently." "That's very nice, Mr. Brennan, but the rules apply to everyone equally. If we make an exception for you, we'd have to make exceptions for everyone, and then what would be the point of having rules at all?" Her tone suggested she had given this speech many times before and was quite proud of it. "Can I at least present my case to the board?" "There must be some process for requesting a variance or exception." Patricia sighed, long and dramatic. "The next board meeting is in 3 weeks. You can submit a written request to be added to the agenda, but in the meantime, the violation stands. You have 48 hours to comply or the fines begin." 3 weeks. Your notice gives me 48 hours. That doesn't make any sense. Those are the policies, Mr. Brennan. I didn't write them, I just enforce them. Now, is there anything else I can help you with today? The fake sweetness in her voice made me want to throw my phone across the room. Instead, I thanked her through gritted teeth and ended the call. Sarah had been listening to my end of the conversation with growing concern. What did she say? I can appeal to the board in 3 weeks, but the fines start in 2 days if I don't remove it. It's a catch-22. I sat down heavily in the chair across from her. I need that pallet jack on Thursday. We have a huge delivery coming in for the senior center's food pantry program. Then leave it. We'll pay the fines for now and fight this at the board meeting. Sarah reached across and squeezed my hand. You're doing important work. Don't let some power-hungry HOA president bully you into stopping. I knew she was right, but the principle of it all bothered me deeply. I had never been the type to just roll over and accept unfair treatment, but I also wasn't sure I wanted to wage war with my HOA over a pallet jack. Still, what choice did I have? Thursday morning arrived with the same beautiful Arizona sunrise that greeted most winter days in Gilbert. I was up at 5, loading my truck with empty containers and heading to the food bank warehouse across town. The pallet jack sat exactly where it always did, and I loaded it into the truck bed with practiced efficiency. By 6:30, I was at the warehouse helping the staff load 2 full pallets of canned goods, fresh vegetables donated by local farms, and packaged meals that would feed the seniors for the next 2 weeks. The Sunrise Senior Center opened at 8, and I pulled into their loading dock at 7:45 with everything secured and ready to unload. Margaret Torres, the center's director, was already waiting with her usual warm smile. Richard, right on time as always. She walked over as I lowered the truck's tailgate. Oh good, you brought the pallet jack. We had 3 volunteers call in sick today, so it's just me and Amy to help unload. No problem, that's what this thing is for. I wheeled the jack down and started transferring the first pallet. Makes the whole process go about 10 times faster. Margaret watched me work, her expression grateful. I don't know what we'd do without you. This food program serves 75 seniors twice a week. Many of them can't afford groceries otherwise. Happy to help. I maneuvered the loaded pallet jack through the loading dock doors and into their storage area. Actually, I might need a favor from you soon. I explained the HOA situation while we worked together to unload and organize the food. Margaret's expression shifted from confusion to outrage as I talked. That's absurd. You're doing charitable work. How can they not see that? She shook her head, her short gray hair barely moving in its practical cut. What do you need from me? I have to appeal to the HOA board in a few weeks. A letter from you explaining what I do here and why the pallet jack is necessary would really help my case. Consider it done. I'll write it today and email it to you by this afternoon. Margaret's voice was firm with determination. And if they need me to attend that meeting in person, I will. This is ridiculous. We finished unloading by 9, and I headed home feeling slightly better about the situation. At least I had support from the people who mattered. The seniors at the center depended on these deliveries, and I wasn't about to let an overzealous HOA board president interfere with that. When I pulled into my driveway at 9:30, there was another pink notice on my door. My heart sank as I climbed out of the truck and walked over to read it. This one informed me that I had been observed using the pallet jack for commercial purposes, which was an additional violation under Section 15, Paragraph 2 of the Covenants. The fine for this violation was $100 per occurrence. I actually laughed out loud, though there was no humor in it. Someone had apparently followed me this morning or had been watching my house specifically. This was escalating into something petty and personal, and I had no idea why. Inside, Sarah was on a conference call, so I took a photo of the new notice and texted it to her. Her response came back immediately, a series of angry emojis followed by "This is harassment. Call a lawyer." She wasn't wrong. I spent the next hour researching HOA attorneys in the Phoenix area and found one named James Morrison, who specialized in homeowner disputes. His website had testimonials from people who had fought back against overreaching HOAs and won. I called his office and explained my situation to his paralegal, who scheduled me for a consultation the following Tuesday. The weekend passed uneventfully, though I noticed a white sedan parked down the street from my house several times. On Saturday afternoon, I walked down to get the mail and saw a middle-aged woman sitting in the driver's seat with a camera. When she noticed me looking, she quickly drove away. "Sarah, someone's watching the house," I said when I came back inside. "A woman in a white Honda Civic. She had a camera." My wife looked up from the book she was reading. "Are you serious? This is insane. Over a pallet jack. I'm starting to think this isn't really about the pallet jack at all." I sat down next to her on the couch. "This feels personal, but I can't figure out why. I barely know anyone on the HOA board." Sunday morning brought another pink notice, this one documenting that my pallet jack was still visible from the street and adding another $50 fine to my growing total. I was now looking at $200 in fines for what amounted to storing a piece of volunteer equipment on my own property. I took detailed photos of my garage area, showing exactly how visible, or rather, not visible, the pallet jack was from various angles on the street. Unless someone was specifically looking for it and knew exactly where to look, you could barely see a corner of it past my car. This was targeted enforcement, pure and simple. Monday morning, I drove to the Meadowbrook Heights HOA office in person. It was located in a small strip mall about 2 miles from my neighborhood, sharing space between a nail salon and a tax preparation service. The office was exactly as depressing as I expected. Fluorescent lighting, outdated furniture, and walls covered in printed copies of the covenants and restrictions. Brenda, the woman I'd spoken with on the phone, sat behind the reception desk. She looked up with a practiced smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Mr. Brennan, right? Are you here about your violation notices?" "I am. I'd like to speak with Patricia Henderson in person if she's available." Brenda's smile faltered slightly. "Miss Henderson doesn't typically meet with residents without an appointment." "Then I'd like to make an appointment, today if possible." She clicked through her computer calendar with obvious reluctance. "She has an opening at 2 this afternoon. 30 minutes. I'll take it." I left the office and killed time at a nearby coffee shop, using the hours to organize my thoughts and evidence. I had photos of the pallet jack's position, Margaret's letter, which had arrived beautifully written and passionate the previous evening, and documentation of my volunteer work with the senior center going back 18 months. At exactly 2 o'clock, I returned to the HOA office. Brenda led me to a small conference room where Patricia Henderson was already waiting. She looked exactly like I had imagined. Perfectly coiffed blonde hair, expensive business casual attire, and an expression that suggested she smelled something unpleasant. "Mr. Brennan, I have to say I'm surprised you requested this meeting. The violation is quite clear-cut." She gestured to a chair across from her but remained standing herself, a subtle power move that didn't escape my notice. I sat anyway, refusing to let her intimidate me. "Miss Henderson, I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about both the equipment in question and its purpose. I'm here to provide context and request a temporary variance while the board considers my case. The board doesn't grant temporary variances. Either something is in compliance or it isn't. She finally sat down, crossing her arms. Then let me explain what you're actually fining me for. I opened my folder and slid Margaret's letter across the table. That pallet jack is used exclusively for volunteer work. Twice a week, I deliver food to 75 senior citizens who depend on those donations for their meals. The equipment is necessary because I'm often working alone or with minimal help, and I'm moving hundreds of pounds of food. Patricia barely glanced at the letter. That's very charitable of you, Mr. Brennan, but it doesn't change the facts. You're storing commercial equipment on your property in violation of the covenants. The reason for that storage is irrelevant. It's a tool for volunteer work. By that logic, if someone stored a ladder they used for Habitat for Humanity builds, would you fine them too? If the ladder was visible from the street and violated our size restrictions, then yes. She said this with complete confidence, as if it was the most reasonable thing in the world. I felt my frustration building, but kept my voice level. Can you at least explain why I'm being targeted specifically? I've driven through this neighborhood, Miss Henderson. I've seen basketball hoops in driveways, boats covered with tarps, and work trucks parked on the street overnight. All of those are violations according to your own rules, yet I'm the one getting multiple notices and surveillance. Her expression shifted slightly, a flicker of something that might have been annoyance or guilt. We respond to complaints as they're filed. If you'd like to file complaints about other properties, you're welcome to do so. I don't want to file complaints about other properties. I want to understand why you're pursuing this so aggressively when I'm using the equipment for charitable purposes that benefit our community. Patricia stood up, signaling the meeting was over. The rules exist for a reason, Mr. Brennan. They maintain property values and neighborhood aesthetics. Your personal feelings about those rules don't give you the right to ignore them. You have your board meeting in 2.5 weeks. I suggest you prepare your case for them. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have other appointments. I gathered my materials and left, more convinced than ever that something else was going on. Patricia Henderson wasn't just enforcing rules. She was going after me specifically, and I needed to find out why. That evening, I knocked on my neighbor Tom's door. Tom Riley had lived in Meadowbrook Heights for almost a decade and knew everyone and everything about the neighborhood. He opened the door with a beer in hand and a surprised smile. "Richard, what brings you by? Want a beer?" "Sure, thanks." I followed him to his back patio where his wife Denise was grilling burgers. She waved hello and I waved back. "So what's up?" Tom handed me a cold bottle and settled into a patio chair. I explained the whole situation with the pallet jack, the violations, and my increasingly frustrating interactions with Patricia Henderson. Tom listened with growing interest, occasionally shaking his head. "Yeah, Patricia can be intense," he said when I finished, "but this does seem over the top even for her." That's what I thought. Is there any history I should know about? Did I somehow offend her without realizing it? Tom was quiet for a moment, thinking. "You know, there might be something. Do you remember about 2 years ago when they wanted to build that new senior living facility on the empty lot at the end of Maple Street?" I had a vague memory of it. "The one that got voted down by the city council." "Right. Well, Patricia was one of the main people fighting against it. She organized this whole campaign about how it would increase traffic and lower property values. There were some pretty heated meetings." Tom took a sip of his beer. "Your volunteer work with the senior center, that might have hit a nerve with her. But that doesn't make sense. The senior center already existed. It's not like I was building it." Patricia's not really known for making sense, man. She's known for holding grudges and being controlling. Last year, she tried to fine the Johnsons because their daughter's pink bicycle was visible in their front yard. Said it violated the aesthetic standards. Tom laughed. They fought it and won, but it was a whole thing. This was enlightening but not particularly encouraging. I was dealing with someone who had both a personal bias against senior services and a history of petty enforcement. My Tuesday meeting with the attorney couldn't come fast enough. James Morrison's law office was in Scottsdale, in a modern building with floor-to-ceiling windows and expensive art on the walls. He met me in a conference room overlooking the city, a tall man in his 50s with graying hair and sharp eyes that suggested he didn't miss much. "Mr. Brennan, I've reviewed the documents you sent over. This is an interesting case." He opened a folder containing copies of my violation notices. HOAs have broad authority to enforce their covenants, but they can't do so in a discriminatory or arbitrary manner. The fact that you've documented other violations that aren't being enforced helps your case significantly. "So, what are my options?" I asked. "Short term, we can request an emergency hearing with the board before the scheduled meeting date, arguing that the ongoing fines create an undue burden while you wait for your appeal. Long term, if they deny your variance request, we can file suit claiming selective enforcement in violation of your First Amendment rights." I blinked. "First Amendment? How does that apply?" "Your charitable work is a form of protected expression and association. An HOA can't punish you for engaging in volunteer work that they personally disagree with. If we can establish that Patricia Henderson is targeting you because of your work with seniors, we have a strong case." James leaned back in his chair. "Of course, litigation is expensive and time-consuming. The better outcome would be getting the board to grant your variance at the meeting." "What are the chances of that?" "Depends on the board composition. How many members are there, and what's your read on them?" I had to admit I didn't know much about the board beyond Patricia. "I think there are 5 total members. Patricia is the president, but I don't know the others." "That's homework for you then. Find out who they are, what they care about, and whether they're likely to be sympathetic to your situation. Also, gather support from other residents if you can. The more people who show up to that meeting backing you, the harder it will be for the board to rule against you." We spent another 30 minutes going over strategy and what documentation I'd need. James agreed to write a formal letter to the HOA on my behalf, requesting the emergency hearing and putting them on notice that their enforcement pattern was problematic. By the time I left his office, I felt I had a real plan for the first time since this whole mess started. That evening, Sarah and I drafted an email to send to our neighbors explaining the situation and inviting anyone who supported my work to attend the board meeting. We were careful to keep the tone factual and not inflammatory, focusing on the volunteer work and the benefit to the community rather than attacking Patricia directly. Within hours, we started getting responses. Some were simple messages of support. Others were longer, sharing their own frustrating experiences with the HOA. Mrs. Chen from 3 houses down wrote that her son had been fined for parking his car on the street overnight when he visited from college, even though there was no other parking available. The Martins shared that they'd been cited for having the wrong color of mulch in their flower beds, but the most interesting response came from an email address I didn't recognize at first, David Peterson, 47. The message was brief but intriguing. "I'm on the HOA board. We need to talk. Can you call me?" A phone number followed. I showed Sarah the email. "Do you know who David Peterson is?" She thought for a moment. "Isn't he the guy in the big house on Elm Street, the one with the electric car? I vaguely remembered someone mentioning him at a neighborhood barbecue. I called the number and he picked up on the second ring. "Richard, thanks for calling. Listen, I saw your email and I think you should know what's going on with Patricia." His voice was hushed, like he was worried about being overheard. "I'm all ears. Can we meet in person?" This isn't really phone conversation material. "How about tomorrow morning, the Starbucks on Val Vista?" We agreed on 8 o'clock, and I spent the rest of the evening wondering what David had to tell me. Sleep didn't come easily that night. The Starbucks was moderately crowded when I arrived, but I spotted David immediately. He was in his mid-40s, wearing business casual and nursing a large coffee. I got my own drink and joined him at a corner table away from other customers. "Thanks for meeting me," he said once I was settled. "I want to be upfront about my position here. I'm on the board, but I don't always agree with how Patricia runs things. This situation with your Pallet Jack is a perfect example." "What's really going on?" I asked. David sighed. "Patricia has been HOA president for 6 years. When she started, she was actually pretty reasonable. But over time, she's become more and more controlling. She sees the HOA as her personal kingdom and anyone who questions her gets targeted." "But why me specifically? Is it because of the senior center work?" "Partially." He looked around to make sure no one was listening. "Here's the thing most people don't know. Patricia's mother-in-law lived in a senior facility that had some serious problems. Neglect, financial exploitation, the whole nightmare scenario. It ended up in a lawsuit that Patricia's family lost. Since then, she's had this vendetta against anything related to senior care or senior facilities. I felt anger rising in my chest. So she's taking out her personal issues on me. That's insane." "I agree, which is why I'm talking to you." The rest of the board, they mostly just rubber stamp whatever Patricia wants because it's easier than fighting her. "But this has gone too far. You're doing genuinely good work and you're being punished for it because of her baggage. What can I do?" The lawyer I consulted said I need to win over the board members at the meeting. David leaned forward. "The other 3 board members are Susan Park, Roger Willis, and Linda Chang. Susan and Linda usually vote together, and they're reasonable people. If you can convince them, you'll have a majority with me. Roger tends to follow Patricia's lead, but if enough residents show up supporting you, he might flip." "This is incredibly helpful, thank you." I meant it. Having an inside perspective changed everything. "There's one more thing." David pulled out his phone and scrolled through some documents. "Patricia has been using HOA funds to hire a private investigator to document your violations. That's not illegal exactly, but it's definitely a misuse of association money, and I don't think the other board members know about it. That white Honda you saw, that's the PI. Can you prove that?" "I have the expense reports. Patricia has to submit them to the board, but she usually does it at the last minute and buries them in a huge packet of documents she knows no one will read carefully. I've been keeping copies." He took a screenshot on his phone and texted it to me. "Use this information carefully. If Patricia finds out I'm helping you, she'll make my life miserable." We talked for another 20 minutes, with David giving me insights into each board member's personality and what arguments might resonate with them. By the time we parted ways, I felt like I actually had a fighting chance. The next week was a flurry of preparation. Margaret from the Senior Center not only wrote a letter, but also organized a group of seniors who wanted to attend the board meeting to speak on my behalf. Several neighbors confirmed they would be there to show support. I created a presentation with photos, statistics about the food program, and testimonials from the people we served. Sarah helped me practice my speech, timing it to make sure I could cover everything important in the 10 minutes the board typically allowed for resident comments. We went through multiple drafts, refining the message and anticipating questions. Thursday morning arrived with another food delivery to handle. I loaded the pallet jack into my truck as usual, but this time I also had a GoPro camera mounted on my dashboard, recording everything. If Patricia wanted documentation, I'd give her documentation, but on my terms, showing exactly what this volunteer work entailed. The delivery went smoothly, and I made sure to film myself and Margaret discussing the impact of the food program. She introduced me to several of the seniors who came by to help sort the donations, and they spoke on camera about how much the program meant to them. One woman, Mrs. Rodriguez, got tearful talking about how she'd been skipping meals before the program started because her Social Security barely covered her medications. "People like Richard are angels," she said, looking directly at the camera. "He doesn't just bring food, he brings hope." I drove home with that footage and immediately backed it up to 3 different locations. This was powerful stuff, and I wanted to make sure it was part of my presentation to the board. The weekend before the board meeting, I received a certified letter from the HOA's attorney. My stomach dropped when I saw it, worried it would be some escalation I hadn't anticipated. Instead, it was a response to James Morrison's letter, formally acknowledging my request to address the board and noting that the fines would be suspended pending the board's decision. It was a small victory, but I'd take it. Monday evening arrived cold and clear, unusual for Gilbert but a welcome change from the heat. The HOA meeting was held at the community clubhouse, a building near the neighborhood entrance that was used for events and gatherings. Sarah and I arrived 20 minutes early, and I was shocked to see the parking lot already half full. Inside, rows of chairs were set up facing a long table where the board would sit. Margaret was there with 6 seniors from the center, all dressed nicely and talking quietly among themselves. I recognized at least 15 of my neighbors scattered throughout the room. Tom and Denise gave me encouraging waves from their seats in the 3rd row. Patricia Henderson walked in exactly at 6:30, followed by the other board members. She stopped short when she saw the crowd, her expression flickering between surprise and annoyance before settling into her usual stern mask. David Peterson caught my eye and gave a subtle nod as he took his seat. "Good evening, everyone," Patricia said, sitting in the center chair and arranging her papers with precise movements. "I'm surprised by the turnout. I hope everyone signed in on the attendance sheet by the door." There was a general murmur as people realized they were supposed to have signed in. Several got up to do so while Patricia called the meeting to order. The first 30 minutes were devoted to standard HOA business, approving the minutes from the last meeting, discussing the landscaping budget for the common areas, and reviewing a proposal to repaint the clubhouse. I tried to pay attention but found my mind wandering, mentally rehearsing what I wanted to say. Finally, Patricia cleared her throat and looked at her agenda. "Next, we have a variance request from Richard Brennan regarding storage of commercial equipment on his property. Mr. Brennan, you have 10 minutes to present your case." I stood up, laptop in hand, and walked to the front of the room. Sarah had helped me set up a portable projector, and I connected it quickly while everyone waited. The first slide appeared on the wall, a photo of the Sunrise Senior Center with its name clearly visible. "Thank you for allowing me to speak tonight. My name is Richard Brennan, and for the past 18 months, I've been volunteering with the Sunrise Senior Center, delivering food to seniors in need. The pallet jack that the HOA has cited me for is essential equipment for this volunteer work, and I'm here to request a variance to keep it on my property." I walked through the presentation systematically, showing photos of the food deliveries, explaining the logistics of moving hundreds of pounds of donations and highlighting the impact on the 75 seniors who depended on the program. When I played the video of Mrs. Rodriguez talking about skipping meals, I heard sniffles from the audience. "This isn't about defying HOA rules for the sake of it," I said as the presentation wound down. "This is about being able to serve my community effectively." The pallet jack is stored against my garage wall, barely visible from the street. It's not an eyesore or a commercial operation. It's a tool for helping people who need it most. I paused, looking at each board member in turn. "I'm asking you to see this situation for what it really is, and grant a reasonable variance that allows me to continue this important work while maintaining the standards of our neighborhood." Patricia's expression hadn't changed throughout my presentation, but I noticed Susan Park and Linda Chang were both leaning forward, engaged and interested. Roger Willis looked uncomfortable, glancing between Patricia and me. "Thank you, Mr. Brennan," Patricia said curtly. "Does anyone else wish to speak on this matter?" Hands shot up throughout the room. Patricia's jaw tightened, but she couldn't refuse to let residents speak at an open meeting. Margaret stood first. "My name is Margaret Torres, and I'm the director of the Sunrise Senior Center. I want the board to understand that Richard's volunteer work isn't just helpful, it's critical. We operate on a shoestring budget, and without volunteers like him who have the right equipment and dedication, our food program would collapse. That would leave 75 seniors in this community without reliable access to nutritious meals." She sat down to a round of applause that made Patricia visibly irritated. 3 of the seniors from the center spoke next, each sharing personal stories about how the food program had changed their lives. Then several of my neighbors stood to vouch for my character and question why this particular violation was being enforced when others throughout the neighborhood were ignored. Tom Riley was particularly effective. "I've lived here for 10 years, and I've seen plenty of violations go unaddressed. But Richard is being targeted for equipment he uses to help people. That doesn't make sense unless there's another agenda at play here." Patricia's face flushed red. "Are you suggesting that this board has an agenda beyond enforcing our community rules?" "I'm suggesting that the enforcement seems selective and potentially biased," Tom said evenly. "And I think a lot of people here tonight would agree with me." The room erupted in supportive murmurs and nods. Patricia banged a gavel I hadn't noticed she had, calling for order. "This board takes its responsibilities seriously and enforces rules fairly across the community," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "Mr. Brennan received a violation notice because his property was in violation. It's that simple." David Peterson cleared his throat. "Actually, Patricia, I'd like to address Tom's point. I've been reviewing our enforcement records for the past year, and I have found some inconsistencies." He pulled out a thick folder. "We have documented violations throughout the neighborhood for things like boats in driveways, oversized vehicles, and visible storage, but very few of those have resulted in fines or escalated enforcement. Meanwhile, Mr. Brennan has received multiple notices and fines in a matter of weeks. Can you explain why his situation was handled differently?" I could have hugged David right then. Patricia looked like she wanted to climb across the table and strangle him. "Each violation is assessed based on its specific circumstances," she said through clenched teeth. "Then walk me through the specific circumstances that made Mr. Brennan's pallet jack warrant multiple fines, while Bob Henderson's boat has been sitting in his driveway uncovered for 6 months without any notices," David pressed. The room went completely silent. Bob Henderson was Patricia's husband, a fact that everyone suddenly remembered with crystal clarity. Patricia's face went from red to pale. That's a separate issue and not relevant to tonight's discussion. I think it's completely relevant to the question of fair enforcement, David said. I'm making a motion that we grant Mr. Brennan's variance request and conduct a comprehensive review of our enforcement practices to ensure we're applying rules consistently. I second that motion, Linda Chang said immediately. Patricia looked like she'd been slapped. We haven't even discussed this among the board yet. This is highly irregular. The residents have spoken. We've heard Mr. Brennan's case, and I don't see what else there is to discuss, Susan Park said. All in favor of granting the variance. David, Linda, and Susan all raised their hands. Roger Willis hesitated, looking at Patricia, then slowly raised his hand as well. 4 votes in favor. The variance is granted. Susan smiled at me. Mr. Brennan, you can keep your pallet jack. The room broke into applause. I felt Sarah's hand squeeze my shoulder as she stood behind me. Margaret was beaming, and the seniors were clapping enthusiastically. Patricia sat frozen in her chair, her carefully controlled world crumbling around her. This meeting is adjourned, she said abruptly, gathering her papers and standing up without looking at anyone. As people started filing out, congratulating me and discussing what had just happened, David approached me quietly. "Watch out for retaliation," he said under his breath. "She's not going to take this well." He was right to warn me. The next morning, my mailbox was full of new violation notices. My grass was allegedly a quarter-inch too tall. My garbage bins were visible from the street for 10 minutes after the pickup time. My house numbers were supposedly faded and needed repainting. It was obvious harassment, and I immediately forwarded all of it to James Morrison. "This is exactly what we need," James said when I called him. "She's establishing a clear pattern of retaliation. Document everything, don't respond to any of the notices, and let me handle it." He sent a cease and desist letter to the HOA that afternoon, warning that continued harassment would result in legal action for selective enforcement and retaliation. The violation notices stopped immediately, but Patricia wasn't done yet. At the next board meeting 2 weeks later, she proposed a new rule that would ban all volunteer equipment from being stored on residential properties. It was so blatantly targeted at me that even Roger Willis voted against it, and the measure failed 4-1. The situation came to a head in early March. I was loading up for my Thursday delivery, the pallet jack sitting in my truck bed, when Patricia pulled up in her car and parked across the end of my driveway, blocking me in. She got out and marched over, her face set in angry lines. "You think you've won, but you haven't. I'm going to make your life in this neighborhood miserable." I pulled out my phone and started recording. "Patricia, you're blocking my driveway and preventing me from doing volunteer work. I'm going to have to ask you to move your car. I'm on a public street. I can park wherever I want. You're harassing me, and I have witnesses." Several neighbors had come out of their houses, attracted by the confrontation. Tom was already recording on his phone too. "You've turned this neighborhood against me," Patricia hissed. "Everyone thinks I'm the villain because you played the hero with your sob story about old people. The only person who made you a villain is you," I said quietly. "I just wanted to do volunteer work in peace. You're the one who decided to make it personal." A Gilbert police patrol car turned onto our street, moving slowly through the neighborhood. I flagged it down, and the officer pulled over, taking in the scene with experienced eyes. "What's going on here?" he asked, climbing out of his car. "This woman is blocking my driveway and harassing me," I explained. "I have video of her threatening me." Patricia's bravado crumbled. "I'm the HOA president. I have a right to enforce rules in this neighborhood." "Madam, you're on a public street blocking someone's driveway. That's a traffic violation, And if he says you're harassing him, we need to address that." The officer's tone was professional but firm. I showed him the video I'd just recorded along with the history of violation notices and the cease and desist letter from my attorney. The officer took his time reviewing everything, then spoke to Patricia privately by her car for several minutes. When he came back, he handed me a card. "File a formal complaint with the non-emergency line. Document everything going forward." "Madam," he turned to Patricia, "I strongly suggest you move your vehicle and refrain from any further contact with Mr. Brennan. This is bordering on stalking behavior." Patricia got in her car and drove away without another word, but her expression promised this wasn't over. The formal complaint I filed triggered an investigation, and the HOA board held an emergency meeting to address Patricia's conduct. David called me with an update the next day. The board voted to remove Patricia as president, pending a full investigation into her use of HOA funds and her enforcement practices. We brought in an independent auditor, and they found she'd spent over $5,000 in HOA money hiring that private investigator to follow you. That's misappropriation of funds. I felt a grim satisfaction at that news. What happens now? She's likely going to face civil charges from the HOA for the money, and depending on what else the auditor finds, there could be more consequences. Susan Park is stepping in as interim president, and she's already pledged to reform how we handle enforcement. Over the next few weeks, the story got picked up by a local news station. A reporter interviewed me, Margaret, and several of the seniors from the food program. The piece aired on the evening news, and suddenly, the Sunrise Senior Center was flooded with donation offers and new volunteers. The publicity brought attention and resources that Margaret had been trying to get for years. Patricia Henderson resigned from the HOA board entirely and put her house up for sale within a month. I heard through the neighborhood gossip that her husband was furious about the whole situation and how she damaged their reputation in the community. The civil suit the HOA filed against her for misappropriation of funds settled out of court, with Patricia repaying the money plus damages. The police investigation into her harassment concluded that while her behavior was inappropriate and obsessive, it didn't rise to the level of criminal stalking. She did receive a formal warning that stayed on record. By late spring, things had settled into a new normal. Susan Park proved to be a fair and reasonable HOA president who focused on actual community improvement rather than petty rule enforcement. The board revised the enforcement policies to require consistency and documented justification for all violations. They also created an appeals process that was actually accessible and fair. My Thursday and Tuesday deliveries continued without incident. The pallet jack sat in its usual spot against my garage wall, no longer a source of controversy. Margaret and I expanded the food program to serve 90 seniors, thanks to the influx of support from the news coverage. One Saturday in June, the Senior Center held a volunteer appreciation event. I brought Sarah, and we were surprised to find that we were the guests of honor. Margaret gave a speech about the importance of community service and how one person standing up for what's right can make a real difference. Mrs. Rodriguez, the woman who had spoken so emotionally on my video, presented me with a plaque that read, "To Richard Brennan, whose dedication feeds not just our bodies but our spirits, thank you for fighting for us." I won't lie and say I didn't get a little emotional. Sarah squeezed my hand, and I looked around the room at all the faces, young and old, who had supported me through the whole ordeal with Patricia. This was what community was supposed to be about, people helping each other and standing together against unfairness. Tom Riley approached me after the ceremony with a beer and a grin. "So, no regrets about taking on the HOA," I laughed. "Plenty of stressful moments, but no regrets. Sometimes you have to stand up for what matters." "Well, for what it's worth, you've made this neighborhood a better place. Susan is doing a great job as president, and people actually feel like they can talk to the board now without getting hit with violation notices." David Peterson joined us, holding a glass of punch. "I just want to say thank you for forcing that confrontation. I'd been wanting to challenge Patricia's leadership for a year, but I didn't have the courage. You stood up first, and that made it possible for the rest of us to follow." "I appreciate that, but honestly, I was just trying to keep doing my volunteer work. I never wanted to become the face of HOA reform." I took a sip of my beer and smiled. Though I can't say I'm upset about how things turned out. The three of us stood there talking about neighborhood business, upcoming community events, and the normal stuff that neighbors discuss when they're not fighting with their HOA. It felt good, comfortable in a way that it hadn't in months. As the evening wound down and Sarah and I prepared to leave, Margaret pulled me aside one more time. "I have something to tell you. The city council called me last week. They want to use our food program as a model for other senior centers in Gilbert. They're allocating funding to help replicate what we're doing." "Margaret, that's incredible. It wouldn't have happened without the publicity from your situation. So in a weird way, Patricia Henderson trying to shut you down ended up expanding our reach to help hundreds more seniors." She shook her head with wonder. Funny how things work out sometimes. Driving home that evening, Sarah and I talked about the whole experience. "You know what the crazy thing is?" I said. "If Patricia had just approved my variance request at the beginning, none of this would have happened. She could have still been HOA president. Her reputation would be intact, and she'd still be living in the neighborhood." "Pride and prejudice," Sarah said. "She let her personal issues cloud her judgment, and she paid the price for it. Meanwhile, you stayed true to your values and good things came from it. I'm just glad it's over." Sarah laughed. "For now, you know there will always be something with an HOA. That's just the nature of the beast." She was probably right, but I felt confident now that our neighborhood HOA had been reformed enough to handle future issues reasonably. And if not, well, I knew a good lawyer and I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself anymore. The following Tuesday, I loaded up for another food delivery. The pallet jack rolled smoothly into the truck bed, and I secured it like I'd done dozens of times before. As I pulled out of my driveway, I noticed Susan Park walking her dog and she waved cheerfully. I waved back, grateful for the peace. At the senior center, Margaret had a surprise waiting. The local news had done a follow-up story, and a restaurant supply company had donated a second pallet jack to the center itself, along with a small electric cart for moving heavy loads. "We're upgrading our operation," she said proudly. "That's your pallet jack they donated, by the way. They specifically said they were inspired by your story." We spent the morning unloading and organizing, working more efficiently than ever with the new equipment. The seniors who came through to pick up their food packages were in good spirits, chatting and laughing. This was what it was all about, making a real difference in people's lives. One of the volunteers, a retired teacher named Helen, pulled me aside as things were winding down. "I just want you to know that what you did, fighting for the right to help us, it meant something. A lot of us felt invisible, like society had forgotten about us, but you reminded everyone that seniors matter and that helping us is worth fighting for." Those words stuck with me for the rest of the day. I hadn't thought about the larger implications of my battle with Patricia. I'd been focused on the immediate issue of keeping my volunteer work going. But Helen was right. By standing up to unfair treatment, I'd sent a message that the work mattered and the people we served mattered. That summer passed peacefully. The HOA held regular meetings that actually focused on community improvement. They approved a neighborhood block party in August, organized a yard sale fundraiser for local schools, and even started a community garden on some unused common space. It was like the whole neighborhood had been holding its breath during Patricia's presidency, and now everyone could finally exhale. I continued my deliveries twice a week, expanding slightly to help with a new Meals on Wheels style program for homebound seniors. Sarah started volunteering with me on some of the deliveries, and we met incredible people with amazing stories. It became our shared passion, something we looked forward to each week. In September, the HOA held elections for board positions. David Peterson ran for president and won easily. Susan Park stayed on as vice president. The new board was diverse, engaged, and actually interested in serving the community rather than controlling it. At the first meeting under David's leadership, he proposed a new policy. The HOA would actively support volunteer work by residents and would grant reasonable accommodations for equipment or activities related to charitable purposes. The policy passed unanimously. "This is the Richard Brennan rule," David said with a smile in my direction. "Born out of conflict but creating something positive going forward." I stood up and addressed the board. "I appreciate the recognition, but I hope we can just call it common sense. People should be able to serve their community without fighting with their HOA. That's not radical, that's just decent." The room applauded, and I sat back down feeling good about where we'd ended up. The journey had been stressful and frustrating, but it resulted in real change that would benefit future residents who wanted to make a difference. As fall turned to winter, life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The food program served over 100 seniors by November, with a waiting list of people who wanted to participate. Margaret hired an additional part-time staff member to help coordinate volunteers and manage the increased demand. The program became a model that 3 other senior centers in the Phoenix area adopted. On Thanksgiving, the senior center held a special community dinner. Over 200 people attended, including seniors from the program, volunteers, donors, and city officials. The mayor of Gilbert gave a short speech about the importance of community service and specifically mentioned our food delivery program as an example of grassroots efforts making a real impact. I sat at a table with Sarah, Margaret, Tom, Denise, and several of the seniors I'd gotten to know over the months. We shared food, stories, and laughter. Mrs. Rodriguez sat next to me, and at one point she patted my hand and said, "Your family now, don't you forget it." I promised her I wouldn't. As December arrived, I received a letter from the Arizona governor's office. I opened it curiously, not sure what to expect. Inside was a certificate recognizing me as a recipient of the governor's Volunteer Service Award for my work with the senior center. The ceremony would be held in Phoenix in January. Sarah actually cried when I showed her. "I'm so proud of you," she said, hugging me tight. "You could have given up when Patricia made things difficult, but you didn't. You fought for what mattered." "We fought," I corrected. "I couldn't have done any of this without you." The award ceremony in January was surreal. I wore my nicest suit and stood on a stage with a dozen other volunteers from across Arizona who had made significant contributions to their communities. The governor personally shook my hand and posed for photos. Local news covered the event, and I got calls from friends and family who had seen the coverage. But the moment that meant the most came a week later. I was at the senior center for a regular delivery when Mrs. Rodriguez approached me with an envelope. "This is from all of us," she said. gesturing to the group of seniors gathered around. Inside was a handmade card signed by every single person in the food program. The messages were simple but heartfelt. "Thank you for caring. You're our hero. God bless you." Reading through them, I felt the weight of what this work truly meant, not just logistics and food delivery, but human connection and dignity. That evening, I sat in my garage looking at the pallet jack that had started everything. It was just a piece of equipment, metal and wheels, nothing special in itself. But it had become a symbol of standing up for what's right, of refusing to let bureaucracy and personal prejudice stop important work. I thought about Patricia Henderson and wondered how different things might have been if she'd chosen differently at the beginning. Instead of seeing me as a threat or a reminder of her past trauma, what if she'd seen an opportunity to support something good? The HOA could have been a partner in the food program, helping promote it and encourage other residents to volunteer. But that hadn't been her path, and the consequences had changed her life in ways she probably never imagined. I didn't take pleasure in her downfall, but I didn't feel guilty about it either. She'd made her choices, and actions have consequences. My choices had led me here, to a garage in Gilbert, Arizona, with a beat-up pallet jack and a sense of purpose that I'd never quite had before. I'd found something that mattered, people who needed help, and a way to make a real difference. That was worth fighting for, worth the stress and the confrontation and the uncertainty. Sarah called from inside that dinner was ready, and I stood up, closing the garage door behind me. Tomorrow was Tuesday, and I had a delivery to make. 75 seniors were counting on me, and I wouldn't let them down. The pallet jack could stay right where it was, a tool for service and a reminder that sometimes you have to stand up and fight, even over something as simple as keeping a piece of equipment in your driveway. Because it's never really about the equipment or the rules or the HOA violations. It's about what we're willing to stand up for and what we believe matters in this world. I chose to stand up for seniors who needed help, for volunteer work that made a difference, and for the principle that communities should support good works rather than obstruct them. And in the end, that choice changed everything, not just for me but for hundreds of people who benefited from a food program that almost got shut down over an HOA violation. Walking into my house, I felt grateful for the whole experience, even the hard parts. Because those struggles had taught me something important about myself and about communities. When people band together for what's right, they can overcome petty tyranny and create something better. Our neighborhood was proof of that, transformed from a place where one person's prejudice controlled everything to a place where diverse voices were heard and valued. The smell of Sarah's cooking filled the house, and I smiled, ready to enjoy a quiet evening before another day of service. Life was good, simple in the best way. I had work that mattered, people I loved, and the satisfaction of knowing I'd fought the good fight and won. And that pallet jack sitting in my garage, it wasn't going anywhere.